Thank you all. First of all, welcome to this focus group, which sounds a bit formal, but it's not going to be a formal session in any sense. We want your own views and experiences. You're joined on the call by Sir Wyn Williams, who I'll ask to introduce himself in a moment, and then I'll ask yourselves to introduce yourself. And then, so just a little bit, say we've got 2 hours in which to cover an awful lot. So, but we're here to listen to what you've got to say. So you won't hear an awful lot from myself and Sir Wyn. Occasionally, I might ask you to give way to another person in the room, or just to move on a little bit, but purely in the interests of time. That's not very likely to happen, but just so you know. So before we get started, Sir Wyn, do you want to just have a couple of quick words about your feelings at the moment?
Yeah, first of all, of course, I'd like to thank the four of you for agreeing to participate in this session. We've had 2 focus group sessions so far, and each of the sessions have lasted the full 2 hours and probably would have lasted longer if I'd had the stamina to keep going. So don't be afraid to say as much as you want, please, because that's what I want to hear. As you know, this is a public session, so there may be a number of people watching and listening, but try and put that out of your mind and just concentrate on telling me what it is you want me to hear. Most of the questions, insofar as they are questions, will come from Jerome, but occasionally I might intervene to ask a question of my own, because sometimes I like to get a detail straight in my head as I'm hearing things. But I hope to be pretty silent. And can I just acknowledge that we have with Ms. Burke our first participant from Northern Ireland, I believe. So that's very good. And in due course, I hope to visit Northern Ireland to hear formal evidence. But I'm very glad we've got someone from that part of the United Kingdom joining us today. So with those few words, over to you, Jerome.
Thank you very much. So I'll ask you all to introduce yourselves, if that's okay. And I'll perhaps start with you, Sian, if that's okay, just to tell us just a little bit about yourself and your context. And perhaps if you could just tell us in a couple of sentences what made you want to come and talk with us today, if that's okay.
Hi, good morning, Barida. My name is Sian Thomas. I'm Noel Thomas's daughter. Unfortunately, 16 years ago, my father was one of the people that was with the Horizon system and got sent to jail. I just feel today on behalf of my family and myself that we would like to put forward. It just didn't unfortunately affect my father, it's affected the whole family. So that's why I asked today that I could speak to Sir Wyn and yourself to give over what the impact was on the family.
Thank you, Sian, that's right. And you lived then and still live on Anglesey, is that right?
That's correct, yes. I've never moved away.
Right. Thank you very much. It's nice to hear from you. Thank you. So, Paul, perhaps if I could come to you and hear your little bit about yourself and why you're here today.
Well, I've got 2 careers. I was 25 years a classroom teacher and then a senior teacher in a large comprehensive school. And my wife and I were both teaching and we wanted a different challenge. So we bought a post office in Cornwall in 1998 and ran it until we retired in 2016. And the reason I'm here is really because I've heard so many of these sessions and I've heard what happened to so many sub-postmasters. I'm just one of the lucky 10,000 plus sub-postmasters that didn't end up in trouble, but paid for the consequences of Horizon for years and years and years. So that's why I'm here to tell my story, which is slightly different.
Thank you, Paul. That's extremely useful to hear. Thank you very much. So Wendy, could I come to you just to tell us a little bit about yourself and your context?
Yes, thank you. So Wendy Burke, as you've heard of, I'm from Northern Ireland. I live just outside Belfast and I ran Dunmurry Post Office. My father actually took over Dunmurry Post Office in 1936. So I literally grew up with the post office in my blood. I did qualify as a teacher and I taught for 5 years. And then I missed, because I always worked in the post office whenever I was growing up, in my holidays, my days off, even in the days I wasn't supposed to be off sometimes. And I went and worked in the bank after I taught. So I worked in the bank for 5 years, and then my father was thinking of retiring. He was in his 70s, and he asked, would I come in and run the office? Would I be interested in it, or would he sell it? And I jumped at the chance. So I ran his office then for 16 years. I left under NT in 2016 also, and I was out of work for 4 days and stepped into a role in the Henderson Group here in Northern Ireland, which is SPAR NI. And they at the time had around about 50 post offices. I started off a day a week, and that worked for a week. I then was full-time, and I took on a senior manager post with them. So I had a great experience with them, and currently I'm working with network support in the NFSP. So that's me.
All right, thank you. And what would you say is the main reason you've come to share your thoughts and feelings today?
So I think historically, people have gone through harrowing experiences. I've been listening quite a bit, obviously, to the inquiry. And whenever you listen to some of the stories, it just really hits home. I also want to see post office, government and Fujitsu bank direct.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Wendy. And finally to Carol, do you want to introduce yourself to the team?
I'm Carol Charlton, and I'm the wife of Kim Wiley, who was one of the 555. We both have a background in banking. Kim worked for a bank for 20 odd years before she took on the post office. For the first 7 years, I worked for the Bank of England. So we both have quite the financial background, which is why one of the reasons we took on a post office. I did the training with Kim. We decided that she should be the sub postmaster, but I worked alongside her for quite a while, until in 2010, money disappeared from the computer system. It has had a huge effect on our lives, health-wise, and that, members of the family and us and that have both suffered. The reason I've come here today is because Kim's mum has been battling breast cancer for a long time and died last week. And I sort of feel I'm doing this sort of because she would have wanted me to as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you for being here, to yourself and to all of you. A couple of you mentioned that you've watched some or part of the public inquiries, and I know, Sian, you've been at one. What we'd like from you today, Sewin really wants to hear your own perspectives on things. So those of you who are former postmasters, we want to hear that point of view. And obviously for those of you who are family members, we want to hear how it's felt to be a loved one, seeing them go through this. So we appreciate there's different perspectives, and that's what Sewin wants to hear today. So please feel free to share that from that point of view. So we'll cover 4 different sort of areas. We'll look about how it all started, both in the post office and the events. We'll talk about running a branch and your views of that from within it and as a family member. But mainly we'll be talking about your experiences and feelings about working with Post Office Limited, and obviously the impact of all of this on yourself and your families and things. So that's the kind of broad structure. But as Sewin said before, I'm not going to do a lot of talking. We're here to listen. But I'd like to start out with just about your sort of feelings and experiences as you started in, obviously some of you have been a long time. I wondered if you trace it back to your own involvement in this whole story. Where if you want, one of you just wants to sort of pick up how it all started for you and your feelings at that time. So perhaps if I start with you, Wendy, about that, because obviously your family history goes back a long way with the post office, probably the most out of all of us here. How do you see this story starting from your point of view?
Well, as you know, my father had it before me. I took over in 1998, just pre-computerization. So, as you will know, I grew up in the Troubles in Northern Ireland. We were very much a community post office at that time. We were sitting on an interface between two different communities. It was difficult, but I mean, as you know, I was helping in the post office at that time. My father wasn't actually running it, but we were the heart of that community, and we had people chatting in the queue that outside may not have been chatting, and that was I'm very proud that happened. I thoroughly enjoyed when I took over. I thoroughly enjoyed running my branch. I've done the manual balances with pen and paper, and I've also obviously worked with the Horizon system. To be honest, and I think I recollect somebody else saying this, it's not post office, it's a trusted brand. It is those people who are customer facing, the postmasters and their staff. That's who the community trusts, and that's who they come into, whether it's for a little advice, it's a cup of tea, a little bit of reassurance. So as I say, I've used both the manual accounting and the computerization. Manually, were there errors made? Probably. Much easier to find because you were the one that was inputting that information and you had it all to hand. My office was one of the first offices in the UK to convert to the new computerization system, which I was quite excited about. I know that because we were changing from manual benefit books to electronic systems, that we had to have computerization. Otherwise, post office quite literally would not be here now. And so there had to be a system that supported automation as such. As it was one of the early offices, the two post office trainers that came, they were lovely. They were totally out of their depth, and they even admitted that numerous times. There was nowhere to turn to for help. So you just really had to plow on and learn the system yourself. Ringing the helpline was no good because they didn't.
We'll come on to some of those issues of operation then in a sec. Just thinking back to that time then when you were about to make that transition from the paper world to the computerized world, what was your prevailing feeling, did you think, at that time, looking back?
Looking back, I was really excited about it. I knew it was going to be a challenge, but I thought that was the right thing to do. It was something that, as I say, we had to do. But little did we know that it was going to be such a challenge.
Yeah.
It was going to take time to learn it, and we all knew that. My staff were very nervous about it, but I was obviously the postmaster, and I had to take it and embrace it because otherwise there was no point really us even changing.
Right. Okay, thank you. That's very clear. Thank you. So how about the rest of you? How would you trace the sort of beginnings of these events? So perhaps Paul, how do you see this sort of starting of this?
As I said just now, both my wife and I were teaching, and I think we both got to a point in teaching where we're not sure where our careers were going. So we made the decision to look to buy a business. We didn't know what business. Many of our family thought we were totally bonkers because obviously we were giving up good salaries to go into business. We were very excited about it, and we finally found this post office in Cornwall, which we thought had great potential. It was quite a laborious exercise joining the post office. I mean, they put you through all sorts of hoops, financial background, criminal records, all sorts of things, and it took quite a long while, but it eventually came off. Although right at the time when we were going to complete, the house sale fell through, and we had all sorts of complications. Anyway, so we bought this post office in Cornwall, and it had quite a good salary. So that was sort of the reason, really, because it was secure. The shop itself was in its infancy then, so there wasn't a lot of turnover. So the shop was the post office gave us a secure income. And as Wendy said, we started off on the manual system with the old paper and the weekly balances on the big blue sheets, and that went on for about 2 years, and that was quite hard to learn. But balancing was really, as Wendy said, really straightforward, because you could, if you had a shortage, you could look back over the week and pretty much find it, or if you'd sent it away, you knew that Chesterfield would send back a correction at some time in the future. So it ticked over, and I guess our shortages under the old system were knock for knock, really, 1 week up, 1 week down, and so on. And I was really quite excited because I was quite keen. I taught IT in school, so I was quite keen on computers. So when Horizon arrived, I thought this will make life easier.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But it didn't. I mean, to me, it was a computer system that nobody who'd ever worked a post office counter had any involvement in its design. It wasn't user friendly. I mean, a lot of computer systems you can pick up just by familiarizing yourself with the procedures and the processes. Horizon wasn't like that. So It was a challenge.
Right, thank you.
And it became more and more of a challenge.
Right, well, we'll come on to those challenges in a sec. Were you based in Cornwall before you took on the post office?
No, I'm Cornish born. So we were looking for somewhere in the West Country. We were both teaching in the Salisbury area, Andover area, and we were looking for somewhere west. And we looked in Somerset and Dorset. It was the right business, and it proved to be. We stayed there 18 years and we did very well, but you know.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to check that. So there was a degree of moving, So Carol, do you want to sort of say, where do you see all this starting from your perspective?
Yeah, well, Barclays Bank were doing redundancies and Kim decided to take redundancy, and we were looking for a business. I was in teaching as well, so I was quite keen to get out of teaching at that time. I just needed something different. We looked at tea rooms and things like this. But my brother and his wife had a post office. And they seemed quite happy doing it. So we looked around for a post office. We're from the northeast of England. We found a post office up at Winlayton. Not the best area in the world, not the worst area in the world, you know, but, and the post office was a lockup. So basically with the redundancy money and Kim sold her house as well, we bought the post office, and it was quite a challenge at first. And I kept doing part-time teaching, sort of just to keep things ticking over. Mm. And again, we think ourselves as quite lucky, because when all this blew up, we didn't have to go down the bankruptcy route, because I went back to full-time teaching.
Right. Okay.
You know, but it was really tough on Kim. It really was. She embedded herself as part of the community. She loved having the elderly customers in particular. She just adored them, and they adored her. You know, it was very, very hard when this happened. We both had 2 days sort of training on the Horizon system, because this was 2003, sorry, that we actually bought the post office. And Horizon had just sort of come in a few years ago. And we had 2 days training at South Shields branch. Very, very basic training. I mean, both of us had been used to working in banks and had double entry bookkeeping. You know, you always have dockets there that represent every single transaction that you can look back on if you've, you know, put something in wrong. So there was always an audit trail. And with Horizon, there wasn't. It just seemed to me at the time to be a glorified till. You know, till with little icons on, basically. You didn't have to add the things up or anything like this. But they did no training in how to balance, how to correct errors, anything like that, really.
Mm. And to what, although you were teaching part-time for some of that period, to what extent were you involved with the running and involvement with the post office business itself?
I sort of like did a lot of work alongside Kim when I wasn't doing teaching. I also sort of like did all the cash and carry runs and things like this for the shop. I enjoyed that.
pretty closely involved then, by the
Yeah,
sound.
I was closely involved. I mean, I was there when, you know, when we had problems a bit later on, and that we did have problems every time there was a thunderstorm. Right, you know, we used to have sort of times when we used to have to reboot the computers several times and that, just to get them going again. Kim had complained to the post office because all of our printers and terminals ran off one 3-pin, sort of like thing, extension lead. It all went through there like a domestic. Said at the time and that she didn't think that was particularly satisfactory. She didn't feel quite secure with that, but they insisted that if the engineers had set it up that way, that was fine.
Okay, well, we'll come to those events in a sec. Thank you. So, Sian, do you want to just say a little bit about how your perspective on this, the beginnings of this?
Yeah, my father started out, we lived in a place called Malltraeth. His parents had a shop there. My uncle had a pub. And then out of the blue, my mum had an opportunity. We had a shop at the time. I think I was about 10 years old. So we always had people around us. And then they decided to take the post office on in Malltraeth, got the elderly people there. Unfortunately went frail and couldn't cope with the work. And then they decided, Mum and Dad, there was an opportunity in Gairwen where we live now. And when Mum went ill, they decided that Dad was going to take over. I think at that time it was paper that they started with, and you could find things. And my dad worked his heart out to build that post office up. The salary, I think, was only about 3,000 when we bought it in the early 80s. It went up to about 30,000. He was working with the industrial people, selling stamps and things like that, trying to tell them, don't buy a vending machine. I get, you know, a bit of discount if you buy stamps off me. And it grew and grew. And he was so much in with the local community that he went in as a county councillor. And I actually was canvassing and things with him at the time. But the worst nightmare he did was get the Horizon system in. It caused him so much stress. He was waking up in the middle of the night and he was saying, can somebody come here and see the screen? And the screen was just like figures rolling. It was very hard to describe because I years ago did the YTS with the post office, but I wasn't involved. I went along a different career. And that was the worst thing that he ever did, was take that Horizon system in, unfortunately.
So a couple of you have mentioned the training and such. I'm just interested in both of those beginnings, about how prepared you were or what resources you had, whether it was training, support, whatever it might be, to make it work. What was the situation at the start with Horizon for each of your settings?
Well, I think we had about 3 days training at a local hotel, but it wasn't a live system. It was just it was just working in the room, and it was really just the nuts and bolts of the basic selling of the products that we were going to be selling on with Horizon. I certainly don't remember any training ever about balancing, and I seem to remember that we used to have operational manuals then, and they were about 8 of them, and I think the balancing was explained in one of those. So we literally just took that and worked through balancing step by step, never really understanding why we were doing it in any particular way.
Okay, thank you, Paul. How about the rest of you? How sort of well resourced and supported did you feel by the training or the wider organisation?
We did have somebody with us for, well, it was supposed to be a week. When we took over, he wasn't there all the time. He had to keep popping off all the time. He did do a balance with Kim. I remember that first time, and she just did things his way from then on, and then later found out that, you know, one of the things that she was doing wasn't wasn't the way that the post office liked it done. So there were little things like that, really. But I remember the manuals, yes. Like great things, and that you had to sort of troll through every time especially when you got something in that you'd never had before. Like the first time I sold a fishing license, I had to sort of troll through and find out what it is you were supposed to do. So.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So Wendy, you mentioned the training. Just tell us a little bit about how prepared you felt to take on Horizon then, taking back to that time.
I really didn't feel prepared at all. And I mean, as I said, I worked in the bank. They were computerized. I picked it up fairly quickly. But when the trainers arrived, they just hadn't a clue. They were learning as they went along. They did stay in branch for 2 days. So I didn't have to go anywhere, and my staff were all in on those 2 days to learn the system. And they left, and it was just, I have no idea what to do next. And we were really left to it. We did ring the helpline numerous times because a transaction came in. It was okay with the card accounts, dead straightforward, swipe the card, off the go. But the different types of transactions that came in at the time, and there were many, you just didn't know where to go. It's not a particularly intuitive system, and still really isn't. So learning it was just a nightmare. In fact, because I sort of self-taught myself, because I had to support the staff, I actually, as the rollout kept going, I sort of became the local helpline for postmasters, because they knew if they rang the helpline, it wasn't going to be a great experience. So my phone never stopped. Just solely because I'd had to learn the system myself.
So just from your reflections on that, what sorts, were they experiencing different things to you or same sorts of issues? What were the nature of the calls you were getting from counterparts? Very
similar issues. The ones that we would have encountered at the very start as well, where we just didn't know where to go or how to process a transaction, or if they had a shortage, what reports to run, all of those things that it just didn't make sense on the system. You had to actually go in there and find all these things.
Okay. And what time would that have been roughly? What time would that have been roughly? What year?
Around about 2020. So it was right at the very start of the system rollout.
20? You mean 2000?
Sorry, 2020.
Yeah. Right, I'm with you. Right, okay. So the people were calling you, and I'll come on to the helpline in a moment. Sian, you were obviously there with your father, and you mentioned, how he started to get problems. Do you want to just sort of tell us how that felt when watching that happen? What was your view of it then?
Oh, your heart broke for him, because he'd be sitting there for hours at night. Us as a family would be in the back, because it was like a post office and a house together. And he would just be thinking, where's all this money, disappearing to? And he was trying to make good. And I remember one incident when Mrs. Van der Broeken and his area manager came over and sat with my mum and dad on the settee. He'd lost around £6,000 at the time. And the discussion was over a cup of tea. You pay 3,000 and we will pay the other 3,000. But he kept on calling the helpline for help, and all he was getting was, oh, it will come back to you next week or in a few weeks. But like everybody else, I don't think he had the paper trail as he did when he had, he was doing it manually. And he was just getting so frustrated. And I think my dad, there was 3 of them that went with him to Llanberis at the time. And I think my dad was the only one that stayed on. The rest of them decided no way. And I wish to God now my dad would have been one of them, but he loved this community. It wasn't just, a post office. It was a community where everybody came and asked advice. And he wasn't just a sub postmaster. He was one of the pillar of the community.
Mm-hmm. So he obviously saw the accounts going wrong and things. You mentioned the area manager there and the helpline. Let's just focus on the helpline for a moment. to just describe to me what your view was, or what he told you about how he was using it, and basically how it felt, if you like, when those events started to develop.
He kept the record. He had like a diary behind him, if I remember correctly, and he used to write on there how many times he was phoning them a week, and they kept on going to him. That's all we got really back off him. Or it'll come back, you know, don't worry about it. But of course, as a family as well, I had two brothers and myself and my mum, and you know, we were all worried because Dad was nearly 60. I know it's young now, but at the time it was a big thing for him to do.
What did he share with you about it at the time?
He would be frustrated, you know, and we'd go for long walks and things and talk and say, Dad, you know, what's going on? Can you find it? And he says, nothing's coming back. He says, you know, and all I get off the helpline is basically they were a waste of space, sorry. They had no idea how to help him. It was like a script. They were reading off the same time. You know, it was like, question 1, this is what you should do, and he would do it. And if anything, it made matters even worse for him. You know, and I had a bit of background with the post office, but I wasn't involved. I had my own job, but I still lived at home with them until I moved to my property Maastricht. But it was like a nightmare. You wouldn't have any other conversation with him, but, you know, I'm losing money. You know, and he actually told the investigators the day they walked in how much he'd lost. And they still did what they did to him, bless him.
And how did it feel at that time to be the daughter of somebody in that situation?
It was horrible. You would stress yourself. You wouldn't. We as a family weren't sleeping properly. We were second guessing each other, saying, you know, where's this going? You know, what's happening to the office? You know, and he'd had a pride and joy in that office. He loved his work. You know, he'd been with Royal Mail for years, you know, as a postman and as a postmaster. And me, myself, I just couldn't help him. And it was making myself angry. We were all bickering. All the topic of conversation at the table was the post office. You know, there was nothing on your mind but the post office, and it's been the same now for 16 years, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I wonder, Carol, if I could ask the sort of same question to you, really, about how it feels to be, you know, seeing your loved one, in your case, your wife, going through this. At the beginning, you know, when it started to occur.
It's been absolutely horrendous. I mean, I'll never forget the day that she was suspended. She came home and she was as white as a sheet and shaking, and I just thought at the time that how can anybody think that Kim could do anything like this? I mean, she's one of the most genuine, honest people you could wish to meet.
So how did that road to suspension start in Kim's case, and how did it feel to be watching it?
Well, Kim had like a shortage in the summer, like a huge shortage in the summer, 33,000 sort of like more or less overnight. And she'd rung them straight away and told them and got no help whatsoever. I mean, it was ridiculous because we didn't do that much turnover. So, you know, it was a ridiculous amount.
And when was that, sorry?
That was in the summer of 2010, I think it was. And she ended up settling centrally then. And then later on, I think it was either the September or the October, the audit team turned up, and they said that they did this audit and said she was another £5,000 short.
So she settled centrally on the 33,000.
And this is it. And Kim she still to this day can't understand where that other 5,000 came from. It just, and you know, but she was frustrated by it all. It was affecting her sleep, definitely. I mean, she you know, like Sean's dad, that she was having nightmares about things. Straight after the suspension, she was having chest pains and things like this. She ended up going to the hospital to have scans and things like this. And it was that she just lost all her oomph. You know, she just wasn't Kim.
And when she discovered that 33,000 for the first time, did she seek assistance from the helpline then?
She did.
And tell me about that then, please, if you would.
Well, I wasn't there, obviously, when she had the call. I was actually teaching at the time.
But don't worry if it's what...
No, well, I mean, from what she told me, you know, she rang them and told them, you know, pointed out to them that it was a ridiculous amount of money to you know, to go missing and things like this. She didn't get any help from them, as far as I can gather, and that they couldn't find any solution to it. They said they'd look into it and they'd report it, but then that was it. She settled centrally and never heard about it again for months. So she thought they must have sorted it some way.
So sorry to pursue this, but just to get a few details, she rings the helpline. They don't actually help very much, at least so far as you know. But then your wife agreed to settle centrally, which I understand what that means. So there wasn't an audit, was there, at that point, notwithstanding that much money?
No, there wasn't an audit. And this is the strange thing is that when Kim was first suspended, she wasn't accused of theft at all. The letter that she got said that they, how did they put it? That she'd lost control of the branch.
All right.
Right. And it wasn't until later on that actually, when they found out that we weren't willing to pay back this money that we didn't think we were responsible for, then it changed and there was a charge of theft made. She was never given the opportunity to say that false accounting or anything like this, because she was adamant all the way through in that she hadn't.
And did that 33,000 emerge as a one-off discrepancy, or was it cumulative of other discrepancies?
I think it was more or less overnight. I don't know if it was a weekend or something, but it basically just disappeared, this 33,000.
Right.
But Kim still says today she didn't think the money was there in the first place, because she balanced regularly. She knew how much she had in the branch. At the time, she was having to order more money into the branch anyway, because a local branch was shut down for some reason or other. So we were getting all their customers in. So she was having to order more money in, but I don't know. We're both still, to this day, we have no idea what happened with that at all.
Okay, thank you.
I just know the effect it had on her.
So Wendy, you described how you became almost a sort of proxy helpline for your colleagues around in the area. Tell us a little bit about the support that you sought and received yourself.
From the helpline? Goodness.
Before you do that, sorry to intervene again, but I'm just curious, was there any kind of different helpline for people in Northern Ireland, or was it centrally for the UK?
It was centrally for the UK.
Fine, thanks. Carry on then, please.
Thank you. Yes, you do continue to ring them because sometimes you're really stuck. I do agree. Somebody did mention that it felt like they were reading off a script. As time went on, I suppose they got a little bit more of an insight into the system, and you would have times when they were helpful. I mean, you have to give credit where credit's due. There were some on there who did go out of their way to try and help. But I suppose if you could do it yourself, you didn't ring them. The call waiting times were long, and sometimes if you got somebody at the end of the phone who you really felt didn't give a toss, didn't care, and it was almost like luck of the draw as to who you got speaking to. And I suppose I kind of at this stage knew the system more or less inside out, and if you didn't really have to ring them, you were very reluctant to go near them.
So how frequently would you have been calling them from your own branch point of view? Just thinking back.
We would have been phoning them on a daily basis, or potentially at least a few times a week. There was always something came up where you were stuck, whether it be just finding some sort of code for an item to order in because you couldn't find it within the Horizon system. It's very clunky. Right through to, if there was something went wrong, if you scanned a DVLNI barcode incorrectly and you knew you'd done it, oh, well, you're not going to hear about that transaction correction for about 16 weeks if it comes back. And when you get an attitude like that, it's you almost just roll your eyes and think, goodness, how unhelpful is that?
Yeah. So Paul, if we come to how you tried to resolve your accounting issues.
Well, when we first started, I said that we were on the old paper system, and we had a regional helpline in Bristol. And the people who made up the helpline were all people who'd worked on the post office counter. So obviously, if you had an issue with your paper balancing or any transactions, you knew you were talking to somebody who'd actually worked in a post office and had actually done what you were seeking the support with. But I share the view everybody else that when we went over to Horizon and they centralized the helpline, the service progressively got worse and worse. I didn't get the feeling that many of the people who ever answered the phone had ever worked in a post office. And I often suspected they were reading from a script, which was exactly the same as the manual I had in front of me. So really, I suppose, like a lot of people, I used to devise my own crib sheets for processes that I had to do regularly, like balancing, and my staff would follow that crib sheet. We didn't follow it was a variation, but it was to suit our branch. And less I contacted the helpline.
Right. So do you want to just give Sewin a quick example of something you might have rung the helpline about that didn't get resolved, if you can think back?
Well, it became increasingly difficult to get anything resolved because they brought in a system whereby unless you had a customer in the actual queue, and that was the problem, say you were trying to sell, I don't know, South African Rand or something, and you didn't know what to do, then you could ring the helpline and they would then ask you, is a customer waiting? And you'd say yes, and then they would help you. But other times, if you said no, they'd say, well, we'll ring you back. And so that necessarily didn't really help you either. So I think we did a lot of, like Wendy said, 2 or 3 local sub postmasters, we used to ring each other because if I hadn't done a transaction, they might have done.
Okay.
So,
and to what extent was that different if you had something like that, as you were saying, with a current customer issue versus trying to resolve a discrepancy or a shortfall?
Well, I have to confess that we always had discrepancies. They were impossible to actually audit trail. And we paid them because we knew that if we rung the post office, they would simply say, you'll need to put the money in. You'll need to put the money in. I said at the outset, we were very lucky. I think our biggest shortage was something like £800. So we just paid it. And obviously it never came back to us. But over the, 14 years of Horizon? No. Yes. 15 years of Horizon. We probably put in thousands, but we were lucky. The shop was prosperous and we just used to rob the shop. Yeah, it was.
So for those of us who weren't or aren't involved with running a branch, when you had those ad hoc, shortages, what did you do to monitor them, or more importantly, to report them, or was it purely?
Well, I certainly didn't. I mean, we didn't report them to the post office after a while because there was never any support. And I wanted to say earlier that I was so disappointed when Horizon arrived. I mean, the hardware and the software, because we already had a very good EPOS system in the shop, that electronic point of sale. And we had backup from the company that put it in, so that if we have discrepancies with our shop tills, they would literally come in through the back office and fix it. And we had an audit trail. We could look and see, oh, that's been missold, something, you know, we'd have something like £1,000 worth of telephone top-ups, and we'd find it because one of the staff had put an extra nought in, you know, so instead of selling 100, they'd sold 1,000. But we could find that with the shop system. But of course, with the post office, there was no audit trail at all. There's nothing. You get faced with £160 shortage on a Wednesday afternoon. You've no means of actually checking it at all, other than checking your stock and checking your cash. And if you can't find it there, well, so we just resigned ourselves to paying it. I mean, Wednesdays was an awful day, and Paul was usually in a tantrum, either in a tantrum or smiling, you know, because it was so frustrating. We tried staff training. We thought there was an issue with the stack, because if a member of staff didn't clear the stack, then a post office card account payment could stay in the stack and then get paid again. We thought of all the things that we might be doing, but it never resolved it. And you know, we just ended up paying.
So we've talked, several of you talked about the helpline itself. I'm just wondering about the role of other parts of the organisation, the Post Office Limited. So I guess the area managers or anyone else, before it came to any kind of action against you. I was Sean, thinking back to what your father's events and the family. What happened before it got to that stage of taking action against your dad?
That was the major one. You know, he had a few, he'd say to us, up and down with the accounts when he was doing it paper-wise. But when the Horizon one came in, he had no hope. You know, they kept on telling reboots, and there was no help from his area manager or Mrs. Van der Broeken at the time. They just wanted you to carry on, you know, and the auditors would come in and he'd be fine. But that morning on the 3rd of October, when they knocked on the door at 7:30, I'd gone to work, and luckily I only worked 5 minutes down the road in the industrial estate. And that day will live with us for the rest of our lives, really. I'd never seen my dad in handcuffs, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody, really. They were very hard on him. But what really got me was they did actually reopen the branch with a gentleman down the road, and the auditors worked with him that morning. And after about half an hour, they shut the shop, and I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Oh, he's short." And I was going, "Short? Doesn't this ring alarm bells?" And unfortunately, they just left it at that. All they wanted was to question Dad on his own. And there was no way we were going to let him be questioned on his own. That's why we decided to take him to Holyhead Police Station, and he was there till 1:30 in the morning. And I remember the two auditors. One was helping with the fingerprinting of Dad, and we were just outside the door. And I remember one of the auditors coming up to me and saying, "If you've got the money, you can fight this." And unfortunately, you know, Dad had lost his job. He was allowed to carry on with the council until the court case. But they basically went from a high to an absolutely rock bottom situation, unfortunately.
Right, okay. So Carol and Wendy and Paul, I just wondered, did you get any kind of advice or support on how to resolve these shortfalls and discrepancies? Was there anything kind of before the action was taken that would have helped you from the Post Office Limited that they provided?
If I can just answer that. You asked about area managers as well. I think locally in Northern Ireland, we were lucky with our area managers. They were extremely good and extremely helpful. And to be honest, to this day, we're still very lucky with them. But they weren't really there to resolve discrepancies. They were there, and more were there to push sales, and you had to sell this and sell that, and they did it in a really nice manner, but they weren't really resolving anything with a discrepancy or anything. It was you were really depending on the helpline. I mean, I could give you loads of examples, but I had a shortage of £2,700 one evening when I balanced. I was very lucky that I have had cameras that were very good in branch, and I went through every single transaction against the transaction log, and it would take hours to do it, and it wasn't the only time I had to do it. And I found a transaction. I knew what it was. I had miskeyed £300 for £3,000, which left me at £2,700 short. And I rang the helpline to get help. I mean, they can trace what bank it went into. They can do everything in the background, but they just won't. They wouldn't help. You'll have to put the money in. And I was told that. Now, the gentleman who was at the counter used to be a postman when my father had the post office and the postman. And I knew more or less where he lived. And I was able to contact a member of his family, and he came down with the money a couple of days later. No problem at all. He said it was an account that he seldom used. It paid his mortgage, and he said he probably wouldn't have even got a statement in for 2 or 3 months, and I would have had to pay that back. And that's the way we were treated. You just, it was just incredible when you look back on it, but almost expected when you phoned. You know, did you expect a lot of help? Probably not. I mean, I could give loads of examples of that, and yes, I made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Shortages, yes, I had them. I had numerous ones. Overages, I would have had some of those too. But you just didn't get the support that you needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Carol, what parts of these resonate with you, or what's different from your experiences?
A lot resonates with me, really. But I think one of the things is that Kim had been quite active in the Federation, more for a social thing than anything else. It was good, she thought, to network with other people. But the Federation, sort of, as soon as this happened, it was like she was cut adrift. There was one of the Federation people who ran a post office just over the other side of the town to us. He came to Kim's investigation meeting with her, but more as a friend than anything. But the Federation itself wouldn't help. They just wouldn't help at all. And in fact, you know, not long after all of this happened, Kim actually got a phone call from George Thompson at the Federation. And to cut a long story short, he was quite sarcastic. He said it was strange how nobody ever reported a large over. You know, so he was insinuating that this was, you know, all his postmasters who he was supposed to represent were all bad uns. And he basically told Kim to shut up and think about what it would do to the network. And
when did that call and those events take place?
It's in her notes, because I did encourage Kim to keep a diary through everything. So it's in her notes there somewhere. I think it was sometime around just after Christmas. It was.
Of what year? Sorry.
Well, it would have been early 2011, I would think.
Right.
So was this at the time or shortly after the time when you said she suddenly found a discrepancy of 33,000? Is it all wrapped up with that?
Well, she was suspended, I think it was October 2010. Sorry, I'm a bit foggy on the dates. She was suspended September or October. She had to herself try to find somebody, like a relief manager, to come in to reopen the branch, because they closed the branch down and defunded it. So she had to do all the running around and try to find people to get the post office back open again for the customers. In the meantime, there were letters going backwards and forwards between her and I think it was Andy Carpenter, You know, and we were basically saying, you know, the postmaster contract says that we're responsible if it's our fault, but you know, we didn't think it was our fault. That was the whole thing, and we were digging our heels in rather over that. But as I say, as soon as she was suspended, the Federation wanted nothing to do with her whatsoever. And it was just really because Dennis was a friend of Kim's that he came along with her to the meeting, well, the investigation that took place. But she was all the way through, really, in that people, she trusted the people at the post office. And I think now she realises that was a very silly thing to do. I mean, when she was audited, one of the auditors actually said to her, "Oh, we think we've got problems with Horizon again." So when Kim had her investigation, she brought this up and sort of said, you know, well, what did she mean by that? Has there been problems with Horizon? And that was it. It was totally shut down. And I think it was not long after that she got this phone call from George Thompson. Was
that audit taken to branch, took place at branch after the 33,000 emerged, do you mean?
Well, no, this was about 3 months later. It wasn't straight away. This is what surprised me, is that 33,000, they didn't send auditors in really straight away. There was an audit when they did the transfer over to Horizon Online, but that wasn't, it was really more a stock take than anything, you know. But this auditor, you know, later on just denied she ever said it. So, and this all the way through, it's been the, you know, prove to us that you didn't do it, you know, and it's very hard to do that when they're lying all the time.
Yeah. So, Paul, what's your perspective on where, you know, the events and the reaction? Because you didn't report these to the post office, right? I think you. And did you ever get audited?
I got audited a few months after I first went there. That was a manual audit, and I certainly had an audit in 2010, but it was fine. It was like £9.60 or something. I've actually found the paperwork. No, I wonder whether, you know, because we didn't ring the help desk and we always put the money in, as far as the post office was concerned, it was hunky-dory. But I totally agree. What I can never understand is that there doesn't ever seem to be an audit trail with any of this. So when we had a shortage, we had no way of trying to find it other than spending hours going through the daily transaction logs, which weren't exactly helpful unless you had an error like Wendy talked about just now. I mean, you could look at the transaction logs, but you couldn't actually, they weren't really very helpful at all. I mean, and as with so much of the transactions, they instantly left the office. So once they were gone, unless the post office were on the ball with an error, it never came back. I mean, we had very few error notices in the, 14, 15 years of Horizon.
Right.
So all those shortages were never explained other than being our fault and our mistake.
So can I just clarify then? So you're settling the shortfalls, you know, as a matter of course, by the sound of it. So because you weren't reporting them, was there any way at all that outside your four walls that anyone in the wider Post Office Limited organisation could have known that these shortfalls were happening?
Well, that's the thing about Horizon. I don't really know. I mean, when you did a balance, you had to do something called a trial balance. Now, the trial balance was where the system would tell you where your shortages or overs were. And then once you saw that, it would usually tell you how much cash was short, because obviously if you had stamps short, you couldn't put stamps in. You just had to pay the value of those stamps. So you would do this trial balance and it would say £150 short. So you'd then put that £150 into your cash, and then you'd do the balance, because unless you did a zero balance, you could not roll over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they had us by the Watsits, really, because you knew that you had to roll over, because if you didn't roll over, you couldn't open on Thursday morning.
Okay.
So yes, but I strongly believe that the post office must have the knowledge of my trial balances going back 15 years. They may say they don't, but I don't believe that, because if it's gone through Horizon, it must be stored somewhere.
Mm. So, well, you've kind of answered my next. So I was going to ask you about monitoring and management of both the trial balances and your trading period balances and so on. Did you ever discuss those? Were they ever anything ever communicated with you in terms of managing and monitoring?
What, with the post office?
Yeah.
I mean, the post office, I had one or two in the early days. We did in Cornwall have area managers, but they've gradually got cut out and disappeared. But then they came back when there was the move towards locals. And then you suddenly saw these people all the time trying to get you to switch from the Fortress office to a local post office.
Okay.
So no, not really a lot of support at all. And I guess because we never reported anything, we never really got a lot of. Mm-hmm. But I did keep a record. Sadly, I left it in the post office when I retired. I did have a record of all my shortages. I mean, I know for a fact that it used to when it was paper, it used to almost balance itself out. Okay. When it became Horizon, it was always against us most of the time.
All right.
Can I just say something about the data that Post Office centrally must have? Following up on what Paul's just been saying there, we wrote to our MP in the December of 2010, and he put a parliamentary question to Ed Davey, who then passed it to Paula Venables, who wrote back, and her response says this, I'm just going to quote this: "A transaction log is available for every branch, and full audit logs of all system and user activity are securely sealed, backed up and retained to provide an evidential and investigatory repository." That's hard to say. And it's not true. Or if it is true, I don't understand why when we asked for, sort of transaction logs and things like this, and that we were told they weren't available.
Mm. Excuse me, the letter that you sent to your MP, yes, and the reply which you just read from, yes, do you think you'd be prepared to send that to me so that I can see these documents for myself?
Yes, no problem.
Thank you very much.
So, Wendy, I wonder if we could pick up on that theme of data, basically data exchange, information exchange. What were you able to access to help to unravel what was going on? What would you have liked that you couldn't get? Could you just tell us a story about that, if you wouldn't mind?
On the system, you were able to access sort of everyday transactions. You could go back over a number of reports that you have, like the transaction log. As has already been said, the transaction log was very difficult to read, and whilst it was easily accessible, without my cameras, as I've mentioned before, I don't think it would have been an awful lot of use. The data that was held by Post Office, certainly I asked for data. I had an issue, for instance, with the changeover day for HNG, or the New Generation Horizon in April 2010. And on the day of changeover, the system was dropping out. We had 2 trainers again that day. The system was dropping out. We had a queue to the door, rang the helpline numerous times to tell them that there was a real issue with the system. And by the end of the day, I had a large loss. To me, it was large. It was quite a few £100s. And I rang the post office numerous times on a daily basis after that. And I have, from the official post office call log, because I asked for it, They advised, if I can provide evidence or details of transactions they claim have caused discrepancies, these will be investigated. That's what they said to me. And that's an appalling way to treat anybody, because they've got the back end system that we could not see. So they could have interrogated that system for the full day to see what happened. But
they don't.
Yeah.
No.
So, I mean, we've talked about support in terms of people and account managers and so on. Picking up on that, did any of you get any technical support? So, for example, I think it was you, Carol, mentioned like thunderstorms and things. But did any of you get any interventions which would try and solve a technical solution to the problems that you were experiencing?
Can I just say, when we had a relief manager in after Kim got suspended, the relief manager was refusing to use one of the terminals, and Fujitsu came in and they took it away and they replaced it. Now, we'd been saying for ages that we were having problems and nothing was done.
Dad was the same, actually. Dad had his machine. The post office engineers came out 3 times in the year to reboot and redo the machine. And I remember the day when Dad, they locked the office door after him, hoovered the office, and then they turned around to us when we wanted the data to prove that Dad was not guilty. They turned around to us and said they'd had a fire where the computer systems were. And they turned around also and said to us that there was a flood. So we still today really didn't have any evidence to support that Dad had taken that 48,000, but all we got was that the computer was dead after 6 weeks and they couldn't reboot it.
And who specifically was telling you this about the fire?
This was the post office. The post office actually told our barrister that there'd been a fire, and then there was a gentleman from Panorama called John Sweeney, did some digging for us, and they told him that it was water damage. So basically, we couldn't work out, and we really didn't have anything to support Dad, because they physically, and I mean physically, hoovered everything. There wasn't even his checkbook. Every personal thing he had in that office and his post office things were gone. So we didn't have anything to fight, really, unfortunately.
We were told after Kim's case was actually dropped, after the second site report came out, we asked the post office solicitors if we could have a copy of Kim's files, because we never had an explanation of why they'd dropped it. And we were told that they'd lost them. They'd lost Kim's file.
And that was the post office solicitors told
Yes.
your solicitors?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So there's one of the themes that I'm interested in looking at is kind of this information flow, if you want to call it that. So I'll just start, for example, Paul, I think you mentioned earlier that you felt, in a sense, your experiences mirror those of 10,000 others who didn't go into the suspension stage. I think effectively, you're paying back the money. Who did you talk to, or who have you shared all your experiences with in the wider world?
Virtually nobody, I think, really. We retired in 2016, and I just walked away. I was so glad to get away from the post office. I mean, from the excitement of the start, by the time we came to sell the business, I've had my time again. I'd never have bought a post office. I'd have bought a standalone supermarket time village shop. They tried to control so much of our business. You couldn't have lottery without their permission. You couldn't do this. You couldn't have. We had no access in the village to electricity and gas top ups because the other shop was not doing them anymore. and we couldn't get it because the post office had to approve it. I didn't really talk. I mean, I think in many respects, even when you went to post office meetings, a lot of us would not talk about shortages because it was viewed as sort of, not the thing to talk about. So many sub postmasters wouldn't ever. I mean, I met sub postmasters who told me they balanced to zero every week. I never did that in 18 years. I don't think anybody's done it, to be honest, but there were people who tell you they did.
So I've just wanted to pick up on that. So you used the figure of 10,000. I mean, obviously that's based to a degree on an assumption, but I'm interested in what you heard from other people. So picking up what you said there, why was it kind of not the thing to talk about? Where did you get that feeling from?
The post office. I mean, the post office, I mean, I had 18 years of running, a perfectly good shop and post office, but I always feared the auditors because I always feared that they would find something that I didn't know was there, So you live with that fear. You did as you were told. Partly the reason I didn't report shortages was I didn't want the post office to know. And I think a lot of sub postmasters had that anxiety because of the controlling way the post office was. I mean, we're hearing in this inquiry some of the really nasty things that happened to sub postmasters, but they pretty much treated everybody the same. They were not a nice organization to work for. I wouldn't work for them again, ever.
So when you're thinking about your sort of informal network that you had in the area, I mean, how widely did you share these concerns or events, just to sort of paint me a picture of how that communication flow happened within yourselves and to the post office?
I think what Paul said was right there. You didn't really talk about shortages or overages or misbalances because that was almost like you'd done something. It was would have been a bit embarrassing. And certainly post office wouldn't have discussed things like that. I would have discussed it more with mum and dad, really, because obviously with the history in the post office, and dad knew how passionate I was, and he couldn't quite understand what was happening when, like years back when I was running it, we didn't misbalance, maybe a few pence here and there, but that's only to be expected. And he couldn't understand what was going on. In fact, without mum and dad, I probably could have been in the same position as other postmasters and postmistresses have been, because they supported me financially as well as emotionally. Some of the shortfalls that I had, I didn't even tell them about, but there were a couple of large ones that I did because I was being told by post office that they were taken out of my remuneration, and to lose £500 a month out of my remuneration would have been devastating. I was a single parent on my own with two boys, but they had a lack of care, really. So my father helped me with that. So I think he was really my support.
Yeah. So, Sian, obviously, in your situation, your father was, the legal action was taken against him and everything. To what extent do you feel, if we move on, we've heard about the attitude of the post office and things, but do you want to sort of sum up how all that felt from your point of view as you went through those stages, as things got more and more serious in a legal sense?
Oh, it was horrendous. I actually took my dad to the police station, and you see somebody in handcuffs, it's not very nice. We were in courts nearly every month. We started in the magistrates, went to the Crown, and then the dreaded day, the 3rd of October 2005, he was sent down. Apparently, they told him, we'll drop the theft and we'll just go for false accounting. And the morning, I went to the local shop to get some bread and stuff, and my dad's face was all over the local paper. In his handcuffs, it was like he'd killed somebody, to be honest. And I remember when they took him down, they gave me his coat and his wallet. And I hugged that coat until the day that we got back to him. But the worst part was not knowing where Dad had gone to. I phoned the barrister, the solicitor, and my mum and me and my brothers were sitting there asking, where's Dad today? And it took us 8 long days to find out that he was in Walton prison. We had to wait another 2 weeks when he got transferred to Preston, to Kirkham, and whoa, we weren't really supposed to give him a hug, but my God, I don't care if they'd have arrested me on that day. I gave him the biggest hug of my life. But, people used to look at you in the street, and my dad was a big character, and people would be spitting at me and screaming at me and saying my dad is a thief. He'd lost everything. They had to sell and move in with me for a year. But the worst part of this commitment was the tag. They would intrude your property. When he did his 3 months in prison and gave him the tag, they actually were knocking on my door nearly every night asking me where he was after 7 o'clock at night, because the curfew was 7 at night till 7 in the morning. And I'd get up and I'd ask them, what do you want? Oh, your dad's, where is he? We've got no signal. And I said, well, we live in a dip, he's not going anywhere. And they'd intrude my parents' bedroom, and they'd be picking up the sheets, the blankets and things to see if he was there. And apparently the tag battery had died, and that's why they couldn't find him. So if you just ask, it was just everything went wrong for him. We had to tell his grandchildren, that was 2, 4 and 7 at the time, that he'd gone to Blackpool on holiday, and we had to find Injrock for him. We couldn't tell him, Tide's in prison. But after a few years, we had to explain, because they were going to school, and because me and my dad had made it such a... In the first 3 years, we were told there was only you. But after that 3 years, we had a gentleman called Charlton. He was my dad's friend. He was a journalist. And he said, Noel, it's not just you. And from that day, our faces have been everywhere for the right reasons. We fought this for the right reasons for him. And I don't regret, 16 years I've lost of my life really fighting for him. The only place I didn't go with him was jail. I've done everything else for him.
I wonder if you could describe to Sir Wyn how the feelings sort of moved between feeling it was just you or just your dad, then being told it wasn't, and then realising it wasn't. What's the kind of movement of those emotions?
You can't describe it. And Lorraine Williams, she was with us in London. She was testifying Tuesday after. She only lived 2 miles down the road to us, and we hadn't known about her either. You felt isolated. You were scared, like everybody says, talking about it, because, this was the post office. You were against the Queen. It wasn't something you just hid, basically. And still today, we find it very hard, especially my mum, to go outside and things. She needs somebody with her, because even now he's been authoritative. We still feel that people have been saying, oh, your father got away with this, But once we got people and things started rolling and going to meetings and finding that, gosh, these are just ordinary people. How can this happen? And we were all different ethnic, it was a broad variety of people, and it was an amazing feeling. But it's still been a hard battle as well, and it's still unfortunately going on. My dad was 75 Christmas, and he's retired at last, but he still finds that we've got to wake up in the morning. And I've been living with them for 16 years because of the financial hardship. And if anything happens to them tomorrow, they live in a pensioners' bungalow. Unfortunately, I had to sell my house at the time with proceeds of crime. And we couldn't afford, because Dad was bankrupt, Mum didn't have only her pension. I think I paid back about 9,000, so I had to sell the house. So if anything happens to my family tomorrow, my mum and dad, I will be homeless. You know, it's still a kick-on effect, but there has been a bit of relief as well and sadness. We lost my brother 2 years ago this month, and he wasn't here to see the final verdict, really. That was hard, 6 weeks of cancer, and we really went through the mill with him and trying to fight for dad. But I'm glad and I'm proud of everybody. You know, every single person that's been speaking in this inquiry has been very humbled. And I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity, you know, to speak about our family, because it does mean a lot to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. We'll come back before we finish for you to reflect on some of the ongoing impacts, if that's all right. But I took it's well, I think it's probably me and Sewin who would be thanking you rather than the other way around. But I appreciate that. So I just wonder, Carol, just if we could just pick up your and Kim's events. So the suspension comes. Do you want to sort of trace through kind of how it was resolved and just so that we can understand what happened there? I use the word resolved loosely, but if you know what I mean.
Well, Kim was suspended. She had an investigatory interview, which Dennis from the Federation sort of attended with her just as a friend. And basically she went through everything, and she said that, you know, she'd lost faith in Horizon, and she really felt sort of that it was Horizon had done something, or there'd been some sort of fault on it. And basically I think that was in a way why they pursued her so long, because she was attacking Horizon. It was like, you know, Horizon's untouchable, Horizon is this. I mean, we still cringe today every time we hear the word robust, you know.
Can I ask you some of the specifics of that, just so I can understand those events? So who would have those conversations been with that was telling you it was robust or telling you not to talk about Horizon? What's the story there?
Well, after this happened, I mean, we were told we were the only ones that it ever happened to. Right. We know now that there's actually quite a cluster around sort of Newcastle area. And Marion, who gave testimony yesterday, you know, we used to go down to the sort of the JFSA meetings and that with Marion and Pete. Pete was a lovely man. But you are told you're the only ones, that's the thing. So you do feel isolated. So I needed to do something practical. So I was trawling the internet every night when I got in from school, doing searches on different things and that, trying to dig and find out information. And in the end, I found Alan's name, Alan Bates, and we got involved with the Justice for Postmasters Alliance, and the relief of knowing that it wasn't just us, that we weren't these like master criminals. And, you know, the first time we went to a meeting, I remember turning around to Kim and saying, well, these look like a bunch of villains, don't they? Because it's like all these just ordinary people. And, you know, sharing teas and coffees together, and people had brought snacks and things. And it was just the relief of knowing that it wasn't us. But then, and it was the sense of helplessness, because you were trying to fight this big organization and they had all the power. And basically, if they said you were a wrong 'un, you were a wrong 'un, you know, and it was so hard. You just kept feeling like you were batting your head against a brick wall all the time. But I did do a lot of searching, as I say. I even found out that the gentleman who was her independent appeal manager who did her independent appeal actually wasn't independent at all. He was involved in the team that was drumming up business for the post office franchises. So nothing sort of like remotely independent about him at all. But I was coming across more and more and more sort of like cases all the time. And I mean, the effect that it had on us, I mean,
before you get to the effect, can I just be clear that I've understood something you said earlier? It got to the stage, did it, that criminal charges were brought against Ms. Wiley?
Yes.
But then dropped, yeah? Have I got that right?
Yes. She had 2 appearances at magistrates' court.
Yeah.
And the first time she went to the magistrates' court, the security guard asked her who she was defending.
Right.
You know, she must look a bad one. And then she had one sort of like appearance at Crown Court, and it was all being delayed because the post office didn't have the evidence ready. And then in the end, there was the second sight report came out.
Yeah.
And Kim's was one of 3 cases that was dropped in the aftermath of the second sight report. And all they did was drop the charges and basically said it wasn't in the public interest.
Right.
So in a way, Kim's felt like she's never had her day in court. She's never been able to prove she hasn't done it. She hasn't got a not guilty verdict at all. It's just they dropped it because it wasn't in the public interest.
And was she actually charged with theft or false accounting or both? Theft. And obviously, from what you said, a substantial sum of money.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The police were never ever involved in our case.
No, I appreciate that. And then my final question is, apart from, I take it, the post office lawyer telling the judge in court it wasn't in the public interest to continue with the case, was there any other kind of detailed explanation ever given to her as to why it was dropped?
No, not to us. This is why we asked for the solicitors if we could have Kim's file, which we thought we were entitled to. And that's when they said it had been lost.
Yeah, all right. Sorry for intervening like that, but I just wanted to get those details. And I think you were then going on to tell me about the effect all that had on you both.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, we kept going really because I went back to teaching full time, so we managed to keep ticking over. But we owed a lot of money. I mean, we owed a bank loan still to help buy the post office. We owed on sort of like credit cards and things like this, and that all had to be paid off. At the time, we were living in a very little sort of like studenty flat in Heaton, and living, quite frugally, really. Kim's mum and dad had been brilliant through all of this. I mean, they've supported Kim through thick and thin, and they'd actually lent us the money to keep paying the staff when we were trying to get the post office reopened for the customers. So Kim had to sort of actually keep paying them, right? And we borrowed a huge sum of money from Kim's mum. So when she died last week, awful, but we still owed her money, and we'll never be able to put that right at all. I mean, health-wise, Kim's dad's angry all the time about it. You just got to mention the post office and he blows up, and it really worries us because he's already had a heart attack. Kim herself's got thyroid problems. The pair of us have both been on antidepressants since the beginning of this. And that sort of has a knock-on effect with the way you sort of deal with everything in life. It puts a blanket on all your emotions. You don't feel the bad stuff, but you also don't really experience the good stuff as well. We both had counselling. It's had an effect on all family and friends. I mean, one of the worst things was finding out who your friends actually are. I mean, it's lovely for the people who supported us are brilliant. But I remember one case of us sitting at home and Kim was trying to speak to one of the members of staff on the phone. And this member of staff was shouting abuse at her down the phone, telling her that Kim wasn't allowed to speak to her because she'd been suspended. And Kim was, as I say,
was a member of staff where? Sorry, where was that member of staff?
Kim was on the phone with her.
The post office.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is it. It was somebody that Kim had thought a lot of, and had made a fuss of her children and things like this because that was just Kim, and it's really hard because to this day we haven't been able to go back up really to the village, when Leighton where it lives. I know a lot of people, when we've bumped into them in shops and things like this, some of them have said to our face, "Oh, we never thought you'd done anything," but there was all sorts of rumours going round. And a lot of people, even after sort of charges were dropped, and I think no smoke without fire. They've dropped the charges, but it's because she hid it so well. It's just you can't prove that you haven't done something. It's very difficult to prove a negative.
Yeah. So reflecting on all of that, how would you sum up the emotional impact it's had on you? And I'm particularly interested in how it's kind of changed the people that you are compared with the ones who opened the post office.
Right. A lot, really. I mean, some in some ways it's changed us for the better. We are more resilient now than we've ever been. When anything sort of crops up, we don't go to pieces about it. We just look for solutions. We do sort of problem solve a lot. But it's hard to explain really, and that it's a bit like when you've got a mobile phone and you get a message to say that background things are running, and you feel like it's stealing your power and it's stealing your data. Well, the post office stuff's like that in a way with us. It's like sapped our energy over the years, and we don't trust people as much as we used to. It had all sorts of effects, I'm sure, sort of on our immune systems and things like this as well, because long-term stress does. Kim found it difficult to get a job at first, but she's now doing care work. She works with adult support. She's a support worker, and she loves that. And I think without all of this happening, she probably never would have even thought about going into that field. So, there are mixed blessings there. There are in, I think, everybody's lives. But my big thing at the moment is this fact that Marjorie's, her mum's died, and we still owed her the money, and it's just not fair. And it's this sense of unfairness that gets you. You sort of grow up thinking that everything's fair in the UK, the legal system's fair and that. And to be honest, what the post office solicitors did is just, I don't know how they sleep at night. I really don't.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for sharing that. So, Wendy, I wonder if you could talk to Sewin a little bit about the impacts all of this had on you, and the outcomes, and how you're feeling?
I'm just very thankful that I haven't had the experiences that other people have spoken about, and it's quite harrowing to listen to. Over the years, did I think I was making mistakes? Yes, I probably did. When I look back, was it me all the time? No, it possibly wasn't. In hindsight, would I have changed anything I did? I don't know. I just don't know. I'd mum and dad, as I say, they supported me, and latterly my partner and my two boys who are now older. And I do think I have still a serious lack of mistrust for post office management. And that's a really sad place to be, because it could be so different. We were told, and hands up, I was part of the Federation. I was an executive officer, and we were told time and time again it was robust, and that word still to this day I find it difficult to use. I can see changes within parts of the business, which is a positive. I think there has to be a closure to this, and there has to be an outcome for all of those that were impacted, and I mean all of them, right from the person that maybe didn't have a loss but struggled with post office and the attitude, right through to those ones that have had a huge impact on their lives. I just want to see a closure and ultimately a proper apology from post office. And I think until that happens, we'll all be left sitting in a kind of a state of limbo to a certain extent. The network, it could have been so different.
Yeah. You talk about the difference there. What sort of consequences has it had for you financially and in your wider life?
Well, as I say, I at the time was a single parent with my two kids. Financially, I struggled every day. I was very lucky. I'm now living where I was brought up. So I'm actually living in the same building now where the post office was. Long story, I had a 9-year divorce. And I couldn't stay living in my house because I couldn't financially do it. So my dad allowed me to move in to what was the empty property at the time with the two boys. So, I mean, that was huge for us. Emotionally, I suppose I'm I sometimes find it difficult to think about and feel that you failed your family at times, but I didn't. Sorry.
That's all right. I'll come back to you in a moment.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Paul, I'm just interested, if you're able to sort of sum up financially, roughly what you think you put in that wasn't recognised by the system that you were just making up the shortfalls.
Yeah, well, it's quite difficult because most of our records are gone. We're still, once you get to 7 years in retirement, you've got no paperwork. We had a little bit, and we found 2,000 or 3,000 for the last 18 months that we were in the post office. So I would estimate probably between 10 and 20,000 is put in, but that's over a period of 16 years. Mm-hmm. So it was never very big amounts, well, 150, 200 pounds. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, I've been very lucky compared to many of my colleagues that we had a thriving business, we had the money, we never had the really big shortages. But I think I would still like to know what the hell was going on with Horizon, because like so many people, for many years, I thought it was just us making silly mistakes and, not being able to prove it one way or the other. The other thing I often thought was that I had staff with fingers in the till. We did all sorts of things with training to try and alleviate any errors. So I just would like to know the truth, because I began to suspect that it wasn't just us, because every time we had a shortage, we worked through what we thought we were doing wrong, but we still had a shortage the following week. And, so I would like to know what was going on with Horizon, really.
Can I just take you back to the period of those events? I wonder, you presumably you had other suppliers into your business, other companies, and technically and otherwise. How did the behaviour and performance of the post office compare with another sort of big company who you were dealing with, would you say, at that time?
Well, we were dealing with a company called Cost Cutter that was doing supplying our shop stock. They had a very sophisticated computer system. We could, as I said earlier, we could actually go back into it and they could support us. I just found that the Post Office Horizon system was never up to much. I mean, do you know, they never even provided a till, so that in all other EPOS systems, your till is linked to your printer and your screen. Mm-hmm. And to complete a transaction, you have to take to cash or check or whatever it is, and then the till opens. But the post office never provided tills. So, there were lots of errors that you could make yourself. I keep on talking about the stack. I'm sure everybody here knows you could leave things in the stack and then pay it twice. If we'd had a till, that would have been alleviated, but they never gave us tills. Mm-hmm. To me, it was never thought through. I never felt as if somebody who worked in the post office actually designed it. It was typical big business, I guess.
Yeah. And if you take a step back from it all now, as you say, you're out of the system now. You say you feel lucky that you weren't worse hit, if you want to think of it that way. But how's it affected you in terms of your kind of just your own mental landscape about how you are now and compared with when you started out in Cornwall?
Well, I think I was pretty disappointed when I finished with the post office. I really didn't warm towards them at all. I had a presentation from them when I'd done 10 years service. I used to get a little certificate and a badge. And when I finished, I'd done 18 years service with the post office, which to this day has never been acknowledged. There was no thank you, no nothing. You just left. And I found that rather sad, especially as I was told that, the majority of people don't do 18, 20 plus years. Most people come and do a period and leave. Mm-hmm. So I have no time for the post office. I don't use the post office very often anymore. I use my local post office, but I don't listen to the post office propaganda or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, Sean, if we come back to you for a moment, I know obviously we're still in the midst of the inquiry and everything, and it was only 2 or 3 weeks ago you went to London. But how do you feel the continued impact of this in your life, would you say?
It's affected me a lot. Luckily, her just solicitors have been very good with myself and Dad, because I've been doing all his paperwork, and I've become good friends with them all. They've supported me as well, not just Dad. I've had 13 psychiatrist session, which I think has helped a lot, because the problem is you relive things, and I've been listening to the inquiry as well, not with just Dad. I've been listening to the others, and I thank God I still have my dad with me. But my impact, I've lost a lot of friends regarding this, and like a lot of it is trust as well. The early days when Dad went to prison, it was hard. It was really hard to adjust, and especially going home, because my mum couldn't come with us at the time to court, and saying to her that she looked round and said, "Where's Dad?" Because that was the reason of the plea bargain, was that we drop the theft and go for false accounting, mm-hmm. and we'll give you a suspended sentence. Unfortunately, that never happened to our family and to a lot either. but I'm lucky my mum and dad are still here. They're celebrating 53 years tomorrow. The post office have tried to break us, but thank goodness their love and trust has been so strong. So we've been one of the lucky ones, and we've been open together, and we've spoken about everything to the grandchildren, to my eldest brother. You know, we've all done this as a team, and I'm grateful to all of them, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's lovely to hear all that family strength. You know, it feels, you can feel it coming from you, so thank you. I just wonder if, just for a minute, if you imagine that Horizon was introduced and everything went perfectly, it all worked, how would your life be different now?
Well, I'd be still living in Maastricht on my own. My mum and dad would still be in the post office, because unfortunately they had to get rid of the post office. But you know what? In a way, there has been some good points. I've made so many friends with ex-postmasters, and truly they are like a forever friends, and that's a good thing that's come out of it. But no, I think my dad would have retired when he was 65 and not still worked in the garden centre and been Father Christmas until he was 75. You know, he's only just retired Christmas Eve. And he needed that, but he loves his walking, the coastal walks and things around Anglesey. You know, he would have loved to have done that sooner. But he's not my same dad. He's dad, don't get me wrong, but it's changed him. Horizon has, and the post office have changed, you know, but he's still the gentle giant he is today. And I respect him for, you know, carrying on the battle and putting his face out there for the media and all that, you know, to continue fighting for all the ex-postmasters. You know, that there's not just the ones that have been through the court, there's everybody to think about. You know, they've all been through hell and back, and they should be compensated, you know, and we need an end. You know, my dad's getting some, you know, he's not getting any younger. And I hope to God that he's still around to see the end of this. That's my prayer.
You say it's changed him. I just wonder, how has it changed you?
It's changed me a lot. I'm very protective of my family. That's why I've sacrificed and stayed at home. I've stopped my life. You know, I'm not married, but I tend to be overprotective sometimes when we go out and people come to your face, because some people are still not taking a grasp of all this. My dad was in a local store a couple of weeks ago, and he turned around and says, well, you're a lucky bee for getting away with this. And I'm thinking, what? You know, people think, oh, it's finished, it's over. It's not over. You know, we still have a long way to go, but I'm very optimistic now with all the things that are happening with the inquiry, that one day we can, you know, it's never going to go away. I'm only 50. It's never going to leave me. It's still going to haunt me. Even nightmares still happen when I see somebody with handcuffs. It reminds me of that. I get nightmares still. You know, I can't even watch a program like Paddington when he goes to jail. I burst out crying, you know, and that's a cartoon supposed to be. But I've been a mum and dad's girl anyhow, and it has hit me hard. I've been lucky with where I work that they have been such a good support to me. I work in a doctor's surgery, and they've been amazing with me and my mum and dad. So, you know, I can't fault them, but let's get a closure. You know, I would like to hopefully enjoy Dad have at least a bit more of his life to enjoy, instead of wondering every morning, you know, what's happening today. You know, it's an ongoing, you know, get the post office to pull their finger out, you know, give people proper compensation for us to be able to live. You know, we've just lived, you know, we've scraped for everything that we have, but it's life, unfortunately.
Yeah. Just before I move on to the others in the room, you used the word sacrifice a few times, that you've had to sacrifice. I just wonder what you feel you've missed out on as part of that sacrifice in supporting your father.
Well, I wouldn't go out much, you know. I was a middle-aged person, really. I could have gone out to the pub and things, but I used to rather stay at home with my family. It was the worry that if I went out, who would say something to me? You know, because we have been very much in the limelight, myself and Dad, for all the right reasons, but a lot of people around Anglesey still haven't got the grasp of what's actually happened in our lives. So I've really, literally, I've been going to work, coming home, and that's been my life really for the last 16 years, working with Dad, doing his emails and finding evidence, you know, paperwork for him and things like that. So I've been his secretary for the last 16 years, to be honest with you. But I don't regret it. But if you sent an email to Dad today, you'd be lucky to get an answer in a year. You know, he's not that technical minded, unfortunately. So that's why I felt, you know, for all they've given me, that I had to step in and help him. You know, and I'll never regret that, really.
No, I can see that. Thank you, Sean. Wendy, I'd like to just come back to you. We've got about 10 minutes to run, and I just wondered, Wendy, if you could kind of sum up where you are now and perhaps what you would be saying to the individuals and the organisations involved in all of this, if just to sort of give some final summaries to Sue in, so you can see how you're feeling now.
I still currently work with Post Office because I now have a role where I support postmasters across the network, and I'm very passionate about it through the NFSP. And there have been mistakes in the past. We've got to make sure it never happen again. I want the inquiry to find the truth, and that is the most important thing that has to come out of this. And it's just not to be bits of it. It has to be the whole truth, and it has to be from all involved, including the Royal Mail Group, because ultimately this happened under their watch. The system was rolled out while Royal Mail Group CEO was in place. I'd like to. It was in the Crown network first, and we've got to remember our colleagues that were not postmasters, but were Post Office employees that suffered under all of this. The CEO and management of Post Office through the years, we've got to hold them to account. We've got to. And ultimately the government ministers who oversaw year after year and changed so many times. We even had 2 in 1 year that have not taken responsibility for it. They are ultimately responsible, and they've got to stand up and be counted along with the rest. Fujitsu, who seem to have been very quiet throughout, I really hope that they're held to account as well. Post Office, I think, from that time, showed a complete dereliction of duty. They allowed these people, many people, to have a considerable impact on their life, whatever that impact was. Right now, I know that Nick Reid's saying that he's resetting relationships. Is that really happening? I think there's too many layers of middle management within the company still, and I don't think he's actually, if he's hearing the truth, is he actually actively acting to fix it? I very much doubt it. In fact, I was quite thrown when I heard that some of the Post Office management who left with money in their back pockets through various schemes are now back in the business, even working in the HSS scheme. And I just couldn't take it in. I really was quite taken aback by it. Going forward, as has been said, there needs to be a closure, and there needs to be an outcome, and that needs to be sooner rather than later, because there are still families out there that are suffering dreadfully. I'm very lucky, as you know, and as I've already said, I had loads of support and wasn't impacted in the way that many others weren't. But we need closure. we just need to hear to find the truth.
Yeah. So that, could you describe to Sir Wynne then what closure would look like from your specific point of view?
That's a really good question, but very difficult to answer. Post office need to change completely from the company that they are now to a company that cares, that listens, that takes on board, and really takes on board people's views, where postmasters are remunerated properly for what they do, and the work that is done within communities is appreciated. Government really, really need to take a look and actually step up and be accountable for what is happening within the network. Paying lip service is no good. Absolutely not. Fujitsu, really? They knew. They absolutely did know that these things were happening. And yet time and time again, when they're challenged, no, there's nothing wrong with the system. Now, our postmasters went to jail. Are there questions around what should happen? As to the outcome, I don't know. I think we've got to lay our trust with Sir Wynne and allow him to make that decision.
Right. Thank you, Andy.
Before we move on, you did mention the historical shortfall scheme. I take it that you would be eligible to apply for that scheme. Have you applied?
I did, Sir Wynne. I got a small payout. I think a difficulty with the scheme is that most of us really have destroyed any documentation as far back. I mean, I know when I left the office, I kept it for my stuff for a few years and destroyed it. So all I really had to go on was memory and a couple of bits. We quite often paid the money before we rolled over, so it didn't show in the accounting systems in Chesterfield. So a couple of the bigger ones I'd had to roll over and send down because I just didn't have the finance to pay it. And then we were given the opportunity to pay it back over 6 months. So that's all I had to go on. I know there was an awful lot more, to be honest, and I don't for 1 minute think that I'll ever know. Yes, we had overages, usually quite small in comparison to some of the shortages. Can we blame it all on Horizon? I don't suppose we can, because everybody can make mistakes. You know, there's errors that can be made, but we couldn't find those errors because the system wasn't an open system where we could actually find them. So yeah, yes, I did, and yes, I got a payout.
Right, and before Jerome wraps it up with Ms. Charlton and Mr. Brandon, can I ask him, you would also be eligible to make an application under that scheme? Have you
yes, I did make an application, and like Wendy, the biggest problem was ascertaining what I'd put in. Because of, as I said earlier, the rules on disposing of documentation, I only have 18 months, or at the time I think I had 2 years of records left, and on the basis of that I did make a claim, yes, which they have paid me.
Yeah, all right. Well, I may say something more about that in a few minutes, but I'll let Jerome wrap up this part of the session first.
Thank you, Sir Wynne. So, Paul, if I were to ask you to give one objective to Sir Wynne to take forward in his inquiry, what would you be requesting?
To get to the truth, really, to find out what we all suspected, what was going on with the Horizon, and if it was a cover-up, to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, fair enough, thank you. And Carol, so finally, if just come to you and for your sort of final reflections, and again, your request from, or anything you would like to put before Sir Wynne to take into the inquiry stages.
I think more than anything else, I think everybody needs to feel that they've had justice. The justice system, as used by the post office, let everybody down. And that needs to be addressed. I mean, you know, it's so important and so fundamental to our sort of citizenship of the UK, and that we trust our systems. We were let down.
Yeah.
And Ms. Charlton, can I ask you, so to speak, on behalf of Ms. Wiley, to confirm, I think, my understanding, but you tell me if I've got it wrong, because she was a member of the 555, she's excluded from, at the moment, from the historical shortfall scheme or any other compensation scheme.
Yeah.
And because she wasn't convicted, but had her case dropped, she's not eligible either for an interim payment. Is that the position as you understand it?
That is correct.
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
Seems very unfair.
Right, thank you. That brings us to the end of the 2 hours, and I think Sabrina and I probably could have had 2 hours with each of you to hear what you've had to say, but thank you so much for all of you for sharing with us and with each other and with the wider world. Do any of you want to make any final comments that you'd like Sewin to hear? It's important that you've got the chance to say anything. Anything else, Sian, perhaps that you'd like to say in closure?
I would be interested to find out why, well, a couple of days before Dad was sent to jail, they knew that he hadn't taken the money, but nobody would stand up and say that anything. So basically, we've had to live with this behind us for the last 16 years. But my question is why? Why did they send an innocent person to jail when they knew that's how Dad got his limb 1 and limb 2? Why? Why did they, they've not just ruined my Dad's life, they've ruined the whole family's life, really. The impact has been horrendous on us all, to be fair. But I need to know why send him to jail when they knew, 4 days before that he was innocent.
Thank you, Sian, and thank you for everything you shared.
Thank you, Diolch.
Does anyone else have any final comments they'd like to give to Sewin?
From me, maybe just a thank you for taking time to listen to us. And again, we're putting our trust in him for the outcome of this. I know it's been harrowing for many, but just a thank you for everything.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, diolch o galon.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good.
Well, because I get the last word, it's I who should be thanking you, because without people like you, there would be no inquiry and I wouldn't be doing anything. So it's because you were prepared to come forward and speak that we have a meaningful inquiry. Now, I want to tell you something that just to put the seed in your head, so to speak, because this is in the nature of a focus group where we've been exploring things. I haven't seen any written evidence from you, like a witness statement or anything like that. And you're probably aware that many people have made witness statements. And obviously some of those have given evidence at the public hearings. But in the future, in the not too distant future, I may ask members of the legal team or even the secretariat team to invite you to make witness statements about some of the things that you've told me this morning. Now, you may know that I have powers to compel people to make witness statements. I wouldn't dream of doing that in your cases. It's a purely voluntary thing, so far as I'm concerned. But I just wanted to alert you to the fact that I may do that in the future, because obviously, because I didn't know in advance what you were going to say, I couldn't judge how important it was going to be. And so now that I know what you've got to say, some of the things are very important. So I may wish to ask you to make a witness statement in the future. So please don't be surprised if you get that request. As I say, If you don't want to, that's fine. But if you feel able to, that would be good. And so finally, thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all. Pronoun to you, Ms. Thomas. And I look forward to the next focus group session, which I think will be next Friday. So thank you all very much. And I'm now going to depart and mute myself. And if you want to have 1 or 2 minutes having a chat to each other on this very good facility, then please do so.
Diolch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. And we'll stop the live stream there, but thank you, everybody.